All right, welcome to a new series, a 3-week series, hopefully, about Purim. I called it Purim in Perspective because both words start with a P, but also, so this class, I'm not planning to speak about the Megillah specifics of the story. Some of you, we've done that together. It was a couple years ago, but we could do it again at some point, but I do have an entire eight-hour series on the Megillah in depth recorded. So if you want to learn the Megillah in great depth, verse by verse, that is available, and it's on YouTube and on podcast, and I can share the links for that. So that's what we're not going to do. I call it Purim in Perspective because I want to give us some perspectives on how to view Purim, how to view the story of the Megillah, but again, without necessarily going into the very nitty-gritty details, which are so important and so fun. But that's not my goal here. So, okay, so tonight, and by tonight I mean today, what we're going to do is we're going to share what I think is a novel idea about how to look at the story of the Megillah. It does involve a little bit of going deep, but we're going to get there through a question in halacha and Jewish law. Okay, so if you have the source sheet that I emailed out, great. If you don't, it's okay. You can listen. And we'll begin with the question that on almost all holidays, we read Hallel. Hallel is a series of chapters of Tehillim, of Psalms, praising God, as you might expect. And generally, we read them in association with holidays, but also with great salvations. And the question is, why do we not read Hallel on Purim? We don't read Hallel on Purim, and the question is, why not? So this question is raised by the Gemara, by the Talmud in Megillah, and this is the first source on the page. And the Gemara says as follows: it says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. I'll read in English for now. There were 48 prophets and 7 prophetesses who prophesied on behalf of the Jewish people. In truth, there were many more than that, but that's what the Gemara lists or counts as those who gave us prophecies that were important beyond just the moment, that generation, but were important for future generations as well. And these prophets neither subtracted from nor added onto what is written in the Torah. They didn't add any mitzvos, any commandments, except for the reading of the Megillah. So the Megillah, we usually look at it, think of it as a rabbinic commandment or rabbinic law, rabbinic obligation, but it does have its origin already in the age of the prophets. You know, the Megillas Esther is counted as canonized as part of the Tanakh, and its authors, Mordechai and Esther, were prophet and prophetess. So that's one exception. Now, the Gemara wonders where'd they get the guts maybe to do such a thing, to make such a move and add something. So they had to have had some kind of hint in the Torah itself, and or at least some logic that led them to this. So the Gemara asked that question: what exposition led them to determine that this was a proper mode of action? And it says Rabbi Chia bar Avin said, in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, that they made the following logical argument. They said that if from slavery to freedom we recite songs, from death to life, all the more so we should. So when we left Egypt, we got to the sea, we had a great salvation, we sang the Shira Sayam, the Azia Shir, the song of the sea. And not only that, but on Pesach, at the Seder, we say Hallel. And so, but there, our lives weren't threatened. We were threatened with slavery there. We were saved from slavery. And yet it's reason for Shira, for song. So if for that we sing, so too for when we were saved, we were facing annihilation at the time of Purim. So all the more so we should sing, which actually is interesting. It implies that the Gemara is viewing the Megillah itself as like a song of sorts, a song of praise to God. Okay, but the Gemara then says, and this is really what I wanted to get into, it says, if so, let us also recite Hallel on Purim. If we can make the same argument, we recite Hallel for the salvation from Egypt, which was just, it wasn't our lives at stake. We went from slavery to freedom. So from death to life, all the more so we should say Hallel. So the Gemara has three answers as to why we do not. The first answer is because Hallel is not reciting a miracle that occurred outside of Eretz Yisrael. A miracle that happened outside of Israel, we don't recite Hallel. And the miracle of Purim happened outside of Israel in Persia. And so we don't say Hallel, whatever the logic might be for that. But the Gemara asks the obvious question. It says, well, if so, with regard to the Exodus from Egypt as well, which was a miracle that occurred outside Eretz Yisrael, how are we able to recite songs of praise? How can we say Hallel? So the Exodus from Egypt was from Egypt, right? And the splitting of the sea was not in the land of Israel. And yet we say Hallel for that. So it seems that this is incorrect. We do say Hallel even for things that happen outside of Israel. So the Gemara answers that actually it's talking about Brisa. The sages teach us the answer. Prior to the time when the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael, all lands were deemed fit for songs of praise to be recited, I mean for Hallel to be recited. But after the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael, so then that land became endowed with great sanctity. All the other lands were no longer deemed fit for songs of praise to be recited for miracles performed within them. In other words, it's true for the Exodus we say Hallel, even though it happened outside of Israel. But that's because it was before we inherited the land of Israel. Something that happened before we inherited the land of Israel, a great salvation, we'll say Hallel for. But a salvation that happened outside, after we inherited the land of Israel, if it happened outside of Israel, we don't say Hallel. Okay, that's answer number one. The reason we don't say Hallel is because the salvation was outside the land of Israel. Rav Nachman said, a second answer, the reading of the Megillah itself is an act of reciting Hallel. You know why we don't say Hallel? In Hebrew, it's Kuriyasa Zu Hi Hilela. The reading of the Megillah, that's our Hallel. That's the answer number two. We don't say Hallel because the Megillah replaces Hallel. Answer number three, Rabbah said, granted that Hallel is said there, meaning by the Exodus from Egypt, because in Hallel we say Hallelu Avdei Hashem, that the servants of God will give praise. So there we can say we're servants of God and not servants of Pharaoh anymore. We were freed from Pharaoh's rule. And so we were free to be the servants of God completely. However, in the case of Purim, we were still under Persian rule. We were still under the rule of Achashverosh, even after the salvation. So it says, give praise to servants of the Lord, but can we say not servants of Achashverosh? No, even after the miracle of Purim, we were still the servants of Achashverosh. Because Hallel contains the words, Hallelu Avdei Hashem, that the servants of God should give praise. And that implies that we are uniquely free to be servants of God. And since that wasn't the case following the salvation of Purim, because we were still under Persian rule and still under the rule of Achashverosh, still under his thumb, so therefore we can't say Hallel because we can't say those words, Hallelu Avdei Hashem. So those are the Gemara's three answers. Answer number one, we don't say, question is, why don't we say Hallel on Purim? Answer number one, we don't say Hallel on a miracle that happens outside of Israel. Answer number two, we do say Hallel. It's just the reading of the Megillah replaces Hallel. That is the expression of Hallel. And answer number three is that there's kind of almost a technical problem. We can't declare that we are the servants of God when obviously we are servants of God, but we can't make such a declaration because we're still servants of Achashverosh following that salvation. We're not completely free to serve God and to praise God as we would wish. Those are the three answers of the Gemara. Okay, now there's a very obvious practical difference which should emerge from these different answers. The answer that says that you don't say Hallel for something that happens outside of Israel. Okay, so you don't say Hallel. You'll never say Hallel on Purim because it was a miracle that happened outside of Israel. The third answer, you don't say Hallel for this salvation because it wasn't a complete salvation. Okay, so we don't say Hallel because it wasn't a complete salvation. We're never going to say Hallel on Purim. But the second answer says, you don't say Hallel because the reading of the Megillah replaces Hallel. Well, what would happen if you are not able to read the Megillah on Purim? According to the second answer, it would seem that if you can't read the Megillah, you can't hear the Megillah, you don't have a Megillah, whatever it might be, you should recite Hallel instead. Because the only reason you don't is because the Megillah replaces it. So this was the conclusion drawn by already the great medieval commentary, the Meiri. Rabbi Menachem Meiri makes this point. Now he acknowledges, well, there are other answers of the Gemara. So it kind of becomes a question, which is the main answer? What's the primary answer of the Gemara? He thinks that kind of the best answer is this answer, that the Megillah replaces Hallel. And the Meiri thinks, therefore, that if one is not able to read the Megillah or hear the Megillah, so then they should recite Hallel on Purim. That's his conclusion. Now the Meiri is an earlier medieval commentary. He's the one who makes this point. And if we kind of follow downwards the later halachic tradition, this question is raised again. The Meiri is quoted in a work called the Birkei Yosef. The Birkei Yosef was authored by Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai, the Chida. And the Chida quotes this Meiri. And he brings, he tries to consider so that's what the Meiri holds, that if you don't have a Megillah, you should say Hallel. But what do other people hold? He goes through the different opinions. Ultimately, the Chida, actually, in another work of his called Machzik Bracha, the Chida wrote actually a ton of books, ton of Svarim. So one of his works is called Machzik Bracha. And there he says the following. He says that some of the great Rishonim, some of the great medieval commentaries and poskim, halachic deciders, quote this as the primary reason. The Rambam, Maimonides, and the Bahag, the Baal Halachos Gedolos, some of the great halachic decisors quote this reason, that the reason we don't say Hallel is because the Megillah replaces it. And it seems that they think that's the main reason. He said, according to this, it should follow that if we don't have a Megillah, if we're not going to hear the Megillah, we should say Hallel. But then he says, but at the end of the day, I still don't think you would say Hallel. The Chida says, even if you don't have a Megillah, even if you're not going to hear the Megillah, and even if this is the real answer, I still don't think you should say Hallel. Why? Because they never enacted that we say Hallel on Purim. The rabbis never enacted that it should be recited, because they said the Megillah replaces it. And so since there was never an enactment to say Hallel, so we don't say Hallel, whether we have a Megillah, whether we don't have a Megillah. It wasn't enacted by the rabbis to say Hallel, and therefore one would not say it. And that's the conclusion of the Chida. Even if one doesn't have a Megillah, even if that's the primary answer, the main answer of the Gemara, still one would not say Hallel on Purim. Okay, so that's the kind of halachic Jewish law introduction that will now segue into, we'll use that to now build out an idea. And the idea I'm going to share comes from a work called Yemei HaPurim, this book. And Yemei HaPurim is authored by Rabbi David Cohen, who is the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the Chevron Yeshiva. The Chevron Yeshiva is not in Chevron, it's in Yerushalayim, it's in Jerusalem. And he raises the following question. He says, okay, so the Chida says that he thinks that it was never enacted to say Hallel on Purim. But he asks Rabbi David Cohen, I don't understand that assumption. Because when we have a great salvation, we are obligated to say Hallel. That is the obligation that's upon us when God saves us from something. So if that's the case, so there was a great salvation in the Purim story, and therefore we should say Hallel. Now, the rabbi said you don't need to because the Megillah can replace it. Okay, but if I don't have a Megillah, my obligation to say Hallel is still there. So how could we say that No, the only if you don't say Hallel, if you don't read Megillah, that's it. There's no other option to say Hallel. They never enacted Hallel. We have a basic obligation. If there's a great salvation, we have to thank and praise God through Hallel. That's what we do. And so why would that obligation fall away, disappear, just because in general we use the Megillah to replace it? That is the question raised by Rav David Cohen. Okay, so to answer this question, we're going to build up an idea, and as I said, go a little deep into understanding, a little deep in the Megillah, but a little deep into understanding certain important concepts. So let's start. If you go back to the source sheet, with the statement of the Gemara, the Talmud in Shabbos, Masechah Shabbos, Tractate Shabbos, it says as follows: Hakorei Hallel b'chol yom. If a person recites Hallel every single day, harezeh mecharef umegadeh. It's tantamount to one who curses and blasphemes God. Strong statement. The Gemara doesn't think it's a good idea to say Hallel every day. Like I said, we say it on holidays, we say it for great salvations. Don't say it every day. So why? What's wrong with saying Hallel every day? So the Maharsha explains that Hallel, the recitation of Hallel, was enacted specifically so we say it for holidays, but we also say it for great miracles. But not just any miracle, or when we say miracle, we mean miracle. The purpose is that when God performs a miracle that where he alters the course of nature, so then we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that through Hallel. So if one would say it every day, so then every day is the same. There's no special days. There's no way to specifically acknowledge the miracles that go beyond nature. And so Hallel has to be reserved only for the salvations, the miracles that occur, that change, where God changes the course of nature. That way we can single them out, we can highlight them, and we can declare, look at the omnipotence of God. He's all able, he can alter the course of nature. But if we would say it every day, then there would be no way to single out those events. We'd just be, business as usual. Every day's the same. How would we highlight those things? And so the reason why a person who says it every day, it's like they're blaspheming in a certain way. They're declaring or losing the chance to declare God's omnipotence and his ability to alter the course of nature, because there's no longer that mechanism of saying Hallel for those special days, because we're just saying it every day. No day stands out from the other. So according to this, it then comes out, the Maharsha is telling us that actually Hallel is reserved for miracles that go beyond the laws of nature, where God alters the course of nature. That's what Hallel is for. So if that's the case, so now we have a new question. Why did the Gemara think that we should say Hallel on Purim in the first place? Then it asked, why don't we say Hallel? And it came up with 3 different answers. The miracle of Purim was within the bounds of nature. It was within the laws of nature. There were no open miracles in the story of Purim. It was a course of events where God was guiding events, and we have to recognize that and acknowledge that, but it was not open miracles. And so it doesn't seem to fit the bill. It doesn't seem like the type of salvation for which we're supposed to say Hallel. And if it's not the type of salvation that we're supposed to say Hallel, so why did the Gemara ask, why don't we say Hallel? The answer is very simple. Such a miracle, for the splitting of the sea, we'll say Hallel, but for something like this, we're not supposed to say Hallel. So why was the Gemara assuming that we should say Hallel? Okay, so there is a chapter in Tehillim, chapter 22, Parak Chaf Beis. It starts with Amnatzeach ala Yeles Hashachar. And in this chapter, the Gemara tells us is a prophecy from King David regarding the times of Purim, the miracle of Purim. At the beginning, it says that first of all, the Gemara wonders why Ayalas HaShachar, different ways to translate it, but it can mean like an Ayala is like a gazelle of the morning. The Gemara explains what that has to do with Purim. Then the second verse says, Keli, Keli, Lama Zaftani. God, why have you forsaken me? The Gemara says that Esther said that as she was approaching Achashverosh's throne room and she felt the divine presence leave her. Okay, it goes through a number of things. Now, later in that chapter 22, verse 23, it's the bottom source of page 1. The verse says, Asapra shimcha le'echai. And in this understanding, this is Esther talking. And Esther says, I will tell your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. But I will tell your name to my brothers. I will tell your name to my brothers. What does that mean? So Rabbi Avram, the son of the Gra, Rabbi Avram ben Hagra, the son of the Vilna Gaon, explains as follows. What it means is that Esther was saying, I'm not going to be someone who denies the good of God. I'm not going to be someone who ignores God's hand and makes the claim that I'm the one who brought about this salvation. Me and my cousin Mordechai, in our great political maneuvering, we're the ones who brought about salvation for the Jewish people, because she could have made that claim. She could have said, it's me and Mordechai. But no, she says, I will tell your name amongst the people to my brothers. I will publicize the matters as they happen in such a way that there's no way that they could explain it except that it came about through God's hand. But not just anything, not just any way, but I'm going to tell Shimcha, your name. That it came about through your name. Which name? A specific name of God, the name of what we call the name of Havaya, the 4-letter name of God. So when God's name is written in the Torah, it's a Yud and then a Hey and then a Vav and then a Hey. Actually, just if you look at the screen. So this is how God's name appears in the Torah. This is how we pronounce it. It's written as Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. And we pronounce it as Ado and then Noi, which means my master. The Gemara discusses that. It's written in one way and it's pronounced another way. And these letters, we often call it the Shem Havaya, the name of Havaya, because actually if we flip them around, we don't pronounce this name of God as it's written, but we could say it as Havaya. It's a way to describe it. So that's the name that she's going to publicize. Asapra Shimcha. I'm going to publicize your name. That, first of all, this name means that God brought about everything into the world. He's Mahaveh Havayot. He brings everything into the world. He's the source of everything in the world. And it was that name that brought about this miracle. And without that name, this miracle never would have happened. That's what the Rabbi Avram, the son of the Gra, says regarding this verse in Tehillim. In chapter 22, she says, I'm going to tell over your name. So she's not just going to tell people that God was behind this, but it's this specific name of Havaya, the 4-letter name of God, that she's going to publicize. It came from this name. So we have to understand what that means. What is the significance of that name versus a different name? There are many, we know there are numerous names of God by which we refer to God, and each one, obviously, there's a difference to it. It's one God, but each name references a different aspect or a different way of relating to God. So what is this name, and what is it that, what's special that she's going to, it's this name that she's going to publicize. So, So let me just tell you what the Gemara says briefly about this name. The Gemara says, I didn't put it on the source sheet, probably should have, but the Gemara in Tractate Psachim, page 50a, Nun Amud Aleph, it talks about this name, and it quotes the verse. The verse says, "V'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz." God will be king over all the land. Bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. On that day, God will be one, and His name will be one. So in the future, God will be one, and His name will be one. So the Gemara says, well, what does that mean? Is God not one right now? So the Gemara says, or actually, this particular question is maybe addressing His name. Is His name not one? So the Gemara says that in this world, it's not quite like it's going to be at the end of days. In this world, when we hear good news, we say, "Blessed is God, Hatov HaMeitiv, who does good." When we hear bad news, we say, "Blessed is God, Dayan HaEmes, the true judge." But sorry. So that's addressing that it's one God. We obviously we know it's one God, but we sometimes have difficulty relating to that it's one God, the God of mercy, the God of justice. We sometimes we say different blessings for different things. We understand it's one, but it's not quite assimilated into our understanding. That's what it means. But in the end of days, we'll understand it's Hashem Echad. It's one God. It's all from the same source. Okay, that's one point, but that's not really our point. Then it says, Ushmo Echad. His name will be one. What does that mean? His name will be one. So is His name not one now? So that's where the Gemara says, no. Nowadays, we don't read the name of God the way that it's written. It's written like we saw as Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, but it's read as Ado and then Noi, my master. But in the end, in the future, we're actually going to read it the way that it's written. So and the Gemara learns it from a verse. The verse says, doesn't quote it here, but the verse says that when God speaks to Moshe at the burning bush, He says, "Zeh shemi li'olam, v'zeh zichri l'dar dar." This is my name forever, and this is the way that I'm mentioned throughout the generations. In other words, there's a name that's God's name forever, but then there's also a name by which He's mentioned throughout the generations. So the name of God forever is Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, but the way that He's mentioned is as Ado and Noi, what we call Adnos, the name of my master. Okay, but what's the difference? Why? What's the difference between the idea of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey and the difference and versus God being my master? So throughout the Megillah, we know there's no mention of God's name at all. No mention of God's name. Actually, I'll share with you a cool thing. So the first Mishnah in Megillah, in Maseches Megillah, the first Mishnah teaches us that there are different days that it's possible that the Megillah could be read on, depending on the situation. And basically, in the old days, it was not always easy to get to a place where they could read the Megillah. So not everybody had a Megillah in every town. So the Mishnah teaches that although we read the Megillah here on the 14th of Adar, and in Jerusalem they read on the 15th of Adar, but the Mishnah says that the Megillah can actually be read. It's possible on different permutations. It could be read on the 11th of Adar, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, not more and not less. So there's a tradition from the Vilna Gaon. So that if you take those numbers, the Megillah could be read the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. And you add them together, 11 plus 12 plus 13 plus 14 plus 15, you'll get 65. What's the significance of the number 65? So 65 is the gematria, the numerical value of the word Ado and Nai. That name of God, which is my master, is the number 65. So, right, Yud and Nun is 60. Yeah, Aleph and Dal is 5. 65. So, and what it says there is the Megillah can be read, and you add up those numbers 65, not more and not less. In other words, and that's what it says, not more and not less. It's hinting to this idea that in the Megillah you can find the Megillah brings out that name, the name of my master, but not, at least not visibly, not more and not less. You can see, now again, it doesn't even say that name of God, but it does say throughout the Megillah, Hamelech, 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 the king, the king, the king. And we have a tradition already from the Talmud that whenever it says Hamelech, the king, although it's talking about Achashverosh, it's also a hint to the king of the world. And it also hints to that God is moving the chains, pulling the strings. So in the Megillah, we can find that name of God. God as master, God as he interacts with this world, within nature. That's what that will represent. God as king, God as master, God as he interacts with the world within nature, within the laws of nature. We won't find, it seems, the name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, because that name expresses how God relates to the world beyond nature. Where do we have this? We have this, one of the first times we have this is the beginning of Parshas Va'era in the book of Exodus, the book of Shemos, where God comes to Moshe and he tells Moses, Va'era el Abraham el Yitzchak el Yaakov bekel Shakai. I appeared to the forefathers with a certain name, Kel Shakai, Ushmi, but my name, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Havaya, that four-letter name, Lo Nodati Lahem, I didn't share with them. And the Ramban there explains, it's on the source sheet, I'm not going to read through it right now, but the Ramban explains that what that means is that God related to the forefathers through nature, meaning although God guided things for them, we don't find, at least not explicitly in the Torah anywhere, any opening miracles with the forefathers. With Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, no opening miracles. We have maybe, miraculous where Yaakov's, his sheep are producing many sheep that are perfect for him in his deal with Lavan. We have different things that are exceptional, but not anything that alters the course of nature. That is the name of Shakai. Shakai, which is Shin Daled Yud, has the idea of Shoded Hamarachos. It's God like overpowering nature in a way, but within the laws of nature. So it's he talks there about this idea that God promises if we do mitzvos, if we pray, whatever these things, so then it will rain. Right now, that's not natural. But we also don't see the laws of nature being bent as a result. So that's one way that God conducts himself in this world. And there's something higher, which the forefathers did not experience, which is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is what we might call Limala Min HaTeva, above nature. It's where we actually alter the course of nature. So, and that's the name that God says to you, Moshe, I'm going to reveal myself in that name. And that's, the 10 plagues. And beyond that, we see, over and over again with Moshe and the Exodus, that name operating where God actually alters nature itself. So that's the name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. So now, that being said, when we say the word, when we read the name of God, it's still written Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, right? We're reading it with the pronunciation of Adonus, of Ado and I, my master, but kind of latent there, it's still that name. So it's almost as if like in the background, we understand there's that Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, there's that name of God, the name of Havaya, that name which means that God brought everything into existence, the name that says that God is omnipotent and can alter nature. It's always latent in the background, the way that we interact, the way that we experience God is within the laws of nature, but we understand that latent is still that other name. And so when we come to the story of the Megillah, so everything happens within the laws of nature. It's all a natural course of events. But within that course of events, and it never says God's name explicitly, but the Megillah does hint to God's name, this name of Havaya. Just some of the main examples. So if you look on the source sheet, top of page 2, so it says, Vatomer Esther Malamelach Tov. Esther said, if it's good for the king, this is when she first goes in to Achashverosh, and she invites Achashverosh and Haman to a party. She says, Yavo Hamelch veHaman Hayom. That the king and Haman should come today to the party that I made for him. Now the words Yavo Hamelch veHaman Hayom, the first letter of each word is Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey. Now this is where Haman is at the top of the world. When Haman gets invited to this party, this is like the pinnacle of his greatness. And he leaves, and he says, he leaves that party, and he says it. He says, nobody gets invited to the king's party except for me. This is Haman on the top of the world. But Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is there. God is guiding events. 2 parties later, right, at the end of the second party, that's when Haman is about to meet his downfall. So look in the next source, chapter 7, it says that the king got up in his fury from his wine feast to the orchard, and Haman stood to beg for his life of Queen Esther, for he saw ki chasa elav hara'a, that evil was determined against him. And there it's at the end. It's kind of like bookended. Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, that's the end of Haman. Evil was determined against him, that's the end. So Haman at his highest point, Haman at his lowest point, we have hints to the name of God. Okay, so let's close the deal now. So we don't have explicitly in the Megillah the name of God. We might even say, right, this everything was natural. We shouldn't really have the name of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, which stands for something above nature. But going back to that verse in Tehillim and Psalms, Esther says in this prophecy, I'm going to publicize your name. And the Rabbi Avraham, the son of the Gra, says, which name? That name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. I'm going to publicize that it was that name that brought about the miracle. So says Reb David Cohen, the idea is that it's true that everything that happened was natural. But what is the difference between a miracle and that which is natural? So one way to look at it is, percentages. What are the chances, you might say? So what he suggests, a novel idea, but I like it. It's each single event was natural. But if you consider the story, and plug for my classes on going through the story, text, verse by verse, if you consider each step and you really learn it well, you will see how so many pieces came together to create this miracle. So many natural events had to fall into place perfectly to bring about this salvation. Such a thing is completely unnatural. Such a thing is lemala min hatav, is above nature. And so the miracle of Purim, all the events coming together, each individual event, or maybe a few of them, yes, you could call that natural. Within the law, it's possible that Esther is chosen as queen. It's possible that, Haman happens to come the night he wants to hang Mordechai, the night that the king reads them. Yeah, these things are possible. You take them all together, completely impossible. Completely impossible. Lemala min hateva. It's a miracle that's above nature. And so, but it's hidden. The names of Havaya, that name of above nature, is hidden in the Megillah. You have to find it. If you go back to page 1 of the source sheet, the bottom source, the very bottom, verse 27 of that chapter, Esther says, again in this chapter in Tehillim, Yehalu Hashem darshav. Those who seek him shall praise Hashem. And again, you have to seek him out in the story. You're going to miss it if you don't look for him. But those who seek him out will find his name within the story. Will find that name, and Esther says that she's going to publicize it. Will find that behind everything is actually a miracle that's beyond the laws of nature. And so, suggester of David Cohen, that's why we thought that's why the Gemara thought you should say Hallel. Yes, you only say Hallel for a miracle that goes beyond the laws of nature. Well, this miracle was beyond the laws of nature. Each individual event was within the regular order, natural order. But all these different things coming together, that's beyond the laws of nature. That's something that's fit to say Hallel. So why don't we say Hallel? Because reading the Megillah is Hallel. Okay, but what if I don't have a Megillah? The Chidah says, no, the only way to do it is to read the Megillah. They didn't enact it in any other way. But now we can understand why. Because you only get to this exceptional miracle, recognizing this exceptional miracle by reading the Megillah. So if you don't read the Megillah, if you don't tell over the story, then there's no reason to say Hallel. There's the only one way to say Hallel on Purim, that is through reading the Megillah, because Hallel is only said for a miracle that goes beyond the laws of nature. You only realize, you can only recognize, you can only find, if you seek it within the Megillah, you seek out all the different events, how they come together. That's where you see that this actually goes beyond the laws of nature. And that is therefore the way that one would say Hallel on Purim. The only way to express our Hallel on Purim is through reading the Megillah and not through any other means. So I think it's a novel idea, but it's a new way to look at the miracle of Purim. Miracle of Purim, it's true, it's a miracle within the order of nature, but beyond that, latent in the way that God conducts nature is actually that name, latent behind the Shem Adonus, the name of I'm the master of the world, I'm guiding affairs, is always that Yud Kei Vav Kei in the background. And that's the case in the Megillah. And so we can actually view this miracle as a miracle that went beyond the laws of nature. All right, we'll hold there.
Well, very nice, Rabbi. Thank you.